we got a really official-looking letter from the Romanian equivalent of the IRS, the Ministry of Finance. And it said that our mission team, which was a religious association under Romanian law, but it said our mission team owed a certain amount of taxes, and it was like $100 and something, which wasn't a lot. But as far as I knew, we didn't owe it. In fact, we had an accountant that we paid to take care of those kind of things for us. And some of the taxes had to do with taxes on gambling, the lottery taxes. And I thought, what is this? So I go to our accountant and I show her the letter, and she says, Paul, the Ministry of Finance does this type of thing all the time. Now, I need to tell you this, on the letter, there was no signature. In foreign countries, when they send out an official letter like that, not only do they sign it, but they also have an ink stamp that they put on it to show that it's official. There was no ink stamp on this letter, no signature, but it was definitely an official-looking letter. And so she says, the Ministry of Finance does this all the time. And she pointed to her computer over there. There was a letter laying on the computer. You see that letter? She said, that one is for another client of mine, and that one says they owe $300. And I said, Miss Costan, how can they get away with this? And she said, Paul, if you'll think about this, most people don't have an accountant that can take care of these things for them. Most people, when they get this official-looking letter from the Ministry of Finance, they're going to think, hey, I've got to pay this, and so they go down and they pay it. She says, thankfully, you've got somebody who takes care of these things for you and knows that this is a sham. And I said, how can the government get away with this? She said, there's no signature on it. There's no stamp on it. You take it over to the Ministry of Finance, and the Ministry of Finance building in Iași, Romania was 11 stories tall. I don't know how many people worked in there, probably a couple hundred. She said, if you take that in there, nobody's going to claim they mailed that letter out. That's the kind of man Zacchaeus was. He was a chief tax collector. In the Roman Empire, the collecting of taxes was a job that was auctioned off. And it went to the highest bidder. And so if you bid the highest, and you got the job of collecting taxes in this small region called Judea, you could collect as many taxes as you want to. And typically, if you're the one who received the job, then you hired other people to work for you, to collect taxes for you. And so Matthew was a tax collector, one of Jesus' apostles. He was probably one of them that had been hired. Zacchaeus was the top dog. He was the chief tax collector. He was probably the one who had received the job for auctioning through the auction process. And so Zacchaeus was a shrewd businessman. And the text says that he was also very rich. He had raised taxes enough on these poor Jews that he was able to line his own pockets. It's easy to rationalize that kind of thing, isn't it? Zacchaeus says, you know what, I need a bigger car. And so he raised taxes just a little bit more. He says, you know what, I've got a bigger family, I need a bigger house, so I've got to raise taxes a little more. Zacchaeus was a wealthy man. Zacchaeus, as we sometimes do relative to the tax man, Zacchaeus wasn't well respected. But Zacchaeus wanted to see Jesus. Well, I don't know why he wanted to see Jesus. Maybe he wanted to see Jesus because he had heard that Jesus had worked a lot of miracles. Maybe because Jesus was a miracle worker, he wanted to go see Jesus. In fact, when Jesus healed Bartimaeus at the end of chapter 18, that was also in Jericho. And so maybe Zacchaeus heard about the healing of the blind man Bartimaeus, and so he wanted to go see Jesus. Maybe he had heard about the fact that Jesus was a poor man. And he wanted to see, what is all this hubbub about this man who was poor? And you can understand why people want to go hear a rich man. Warren Buffett spoke at a fundraiser just a few days ago. I don't remember where, New York City or somewhere. They raised 2.6 million people. People paid to go be in the presence of Warren Buffett. Maybe Zacchaeus wanted to go be in the presence of this man who eschewed riches and money. Maybe you want to go see him because of that. We don't know why he wanted to go see Jesus. But he wanted to go see Jesus. And he gets up there, and the crowd is so heavy that he can't see Jesus. But nobody's letting him through. He is short, and he can't see through the crowd, and nobody's letting him through. You'd think, man, this man is wealthy. You need to part ways and let him come through. No, they're not doing that for Zacchaeus. So the picture we get is not only is he small in stature physically, but he's also small in stature socially. He doesn't have the respect of his social peers. So what does he do? He runs on ahead of the crowd and he finds this sycamore tree and he climbs up in this tree so that he can see Jesus. How undignified can you get? How many of you grown men would go climb a tree right now? I've got an apple tree in our backyard. How many of you want to go climb that apple tree? I used to climb trees when I was little. I love climbing trees. One time I was in the 4th grade, and some boys at school gave me a can of Skull. And I went out back in our backyard, climbed the tree, put some Skull in my mouth, got sick, spit it out, and learned a lesson. A tree in the backyard is a great place to learn lessons. We went down to visit my grandma in Mobile one time, and my sister climbed a tree. It was a pine tree in her backyard. She got so high up, she couldn't come back down. Now you hear cats, climbing places, and you have to call the fire department to come get them out. I've never seen cat skeletons in trees or on rooftops. They find a way to get down. But my sister couldn't get down, so my older brother, who is 4 years older than she is, he climbed up the tree, told her where to put her hands and feet and so forth, and helped her back down. She learned a lesson. You don't put yourself in a position that you can't get yourself back out of. Zacchaeus was going to learn a lesson when he climbed this sycamore tree. We get the picture here from Luke that nobody sees Zacchaeus climb this tree. Zacchaeus is doing this in a way that nobody sees. And certainly undignified for a grown man to climb a tree. And so Zacchaeus is selfish. But he's going to meet Jesus. Look at verses 5 and 6. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and he said, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for today I must stay at your house. And he hurried and he came down and received him gladly. Zacchaeus meets Jesus. And what does Jesus do for him? First of all, Jesus says, Zacchaeus. Nobody knew him. They didn't even know that he was in the tree. But Jesus comes and he looks up in the tree and he calls him by his name. Zacchaeus, come down. Jesus knows every one of us. Jesus knows the most intimate thoughts in our hearts. Jesus knows the most secret desires in the furthest corners of our minds. Jesus knows. And one day, we're all going to stand before God on the day of judgment, and Jesus is going to call our name. Jesus is going to say, oh, come. And when he does, when he calls your name, it's going to floor you because he's going to say it in such a way that you're going to know that he knows you. Inside and out, you're going to realize he knows everything I've ever done. There's nothing I've ever done that has been hidden from his eyes. Jesus comes to that sycamore tree and he says, Zacchaeus, I want you to come down because today I'm going to go to your house. Today, Jesus says, I've got plans for you. Come down here, Zacchaeus, because I've got something I want to talk to you about. Jesus had plans for Zacchaeus. Jesus knew that Zacchaeus could do more than what he was doing. Jesus knew that Zacchaeus could be more than what he was being. Jesus had plans for Zacchaeus. And so Jesus says, Zacchaeus, come down and let's talk. Every one of us needs to have an encounter with Jesus Christ. Everybody in Paris and in Bourbon County needs to come in contact with Jesus Christ. Because when you do, he turns your world upside down. Zacchaeus got down out of that tree. You could just see him scurrying out of that tree so that he could be with Jesus. The Bible says that Zacchaeus received him gladly. That gives us an indication into the heart of Zacchaeus. Maybe he was living the way he was living as this rich tax collector because that's what was expected out of him. I mean, if you're a tax collector, you're supposed to be rich, you're supposed to be greedy, you're supposed to be selfish. But deep down inside, Zacchaeus realized that he had something that was missing. And when Jesus says, Zacchaeus, I've got something to talk to you about, Zacchaeus says, great. Zacchaeus received Jesus gladly. You know why we're selfish sometimes? If you go to a little child, it's about 1 year old, 2 year old, and they're holding a bag full of goldfish or cookies, and you said, "Can I have some of those cookies?" What's the typical 1 or 2 year old going to do? Here. They're going to share. You know why? Because psychologically, a 1 or 2 year old has not developed the mental awareness that things can disappear. They are not at that psychological stage yet where they understand that things can go away. So here, they don't understand if I give you something and you take it, then I'm going to have less. They don't understand that. But then when they get to be about 3 or 4 years old, they get to that psychological developmental stage that they realize if I hand you my bag of cookies and you're going to take something, that's going to be less for me. And so if you ask a 3 or 4 or 5 year old, "Can I have some of your cookies?" what are they going to say? No. Sometimes we don't ever grow out of that. Sometimes we don't grow out of that mentality that I get. If I give you 2 or 3 hours out of my time in a week, I'm not going to get those hours back. And I'm going to be less 2 or 3 hours. If I give $5 or $10, $15, $20 a year or whatever, then that's money I'm not going to get back. And we as Christians shouldn't have that attitude. What is it about meeting Jesus that changes you and makes you selfless? Well, first of all, as we talked about last week from Philippians chapter 2, we recognize what Jesus gave up when He came to earth. Jesus was in the form of God. He was equal with God, but He did not consider something to hold on to. And He emptied Himself and He came to earth to serve us. And Jesus says, "I want you to do the same thing." And so first of all, when we meet Jesus, it helps us to understand what Jesus did for us and that He asked us to do that for others. Second of all, we forget sometimes as Christians the promise that Paul gives us in Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 20 that God is able to do for us exceedingly abundantly beyond all that we ask or think. God can do that? Yeah, God can do that. If I give somebody 3 hours out of my week, is God going to help me make up for those 3 hours? Yes, God's going to do that. You see, you can't outgive God. Whether it's funds or skills or money, time, you can't outgive God. When you meet Jesus, you realize that. The one who created time can manipulate time, and He can help you find an hour during the week that you didn't realize you had when you gave that hour to somebody else. Third, when you meet Jesus, you realize truly that it is more blessed to give than to receive. Acts 20, verse 35. How blessed it is to give as opposed to receive. And so Zacchaeus meets Jesus. He gladly receives Him, and it turns Zacchaeus from a selfish individual to a selfless individual. Beautiful passage. In stark contrast to the rich young ruler. Look at verses 7 and 8. When they saw it, they who? Pharisees. We'll come back to that point in a moment. They all began to grumble, saying, "He's gone to be the guest of a man who is a sinner." Zacchaeus stopped, apparently on the road home. And he said to the Lord, "Behold, Lord, half of my possessions I will give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will give back 4 times as much." And Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to your house." Oh, Zacchaeus turned into a selfless individual. Zacchaeus met Jesus and he realized that when you give things away, it doesn't disappear. Now the people grumble. You know why they grumble? 2 reasons. Jesus was a friend of the tax collector and sinner. Remember? Luke chapter 5 and verse 30. Luke chapter 7. Jesus says that the people say, "You are a glutton and a wine drinker. You are a friend of the tax collector and the sinner." They didn't like tax collectors. Obvious reasons. Because they were dishonest. And for Jesus to go in and eat with a man and have fellowship basically with a man, to enjoy the hospitality of a man who made his money dishonestly, that wasn't good. If Bernie Madoff came to Paris, Kentucky, how many people would want to go enjoy a relationship with